What we're asking them to do is expand the base of the sales tax. And that means making more services, mostly services, some items subject to the tax that aren't subject to the tax now. Rich Shooker, who spoke to me earlier, did some research on this. He likes to call the sales tax a profile tax, and it certainly is. When you think about it, most low-income people pay sales tax on almost everything they purchase. If you take your car to the garage and have an oil change, you pay taxes on it. But if you own a private airplane, you have service in that plane, there's no sales tax. You have a pool in your backyard and have a pool service, there's no tax on it. Those who like to say that the sales tax is regressive doesn't really apply in this case to the expansion of the base, because most low-income people don't use the services or the products that would be added to the base. There are three basic taxes that raise enough money to fund education: property tax, sales tax, the income tax. Property tax we're trying to get rid of. Income tax is a possibility. If the legislature comes back with that as an idea, we'll consider it. But it has a couple of downfalls. First of all, small businesses, sole proprietorships, partnerships, subchapter S corporations in Pennsylvania are taxed at the personal income tax rate. So this would be damaging to businesses and jobs. Second, fewer than half the people in Pennsylvania actually pay the personal income tax. Pensions are exempt, Social Security is exempt, and anyone earning less than $35,000 gets forgiveness. So we really want to take the burden from one small group, the homeowners, and move it to an equally small group, those who pay the income tax. We think it's a bad idea, although we will listen to it. The other suggestion has been a progressive personal income tax. In order to do that, the top rate on a progressive scale would have to be about 7%. Any lawmaker tells you they want to go to a progressive income tax, forget it. It isn't going to happen, because there's no way they're going to pass a law with a 7% top rate. Pennsylvania has a unique ability to do this. Not many states have it. Our sales tax base is really very narrow. Most states have a much broader sales tax base than we have. And we have the unique ability to broaden it to the point where we can replace property taxes. All the things that aren't taxed now, this is the entire spectrum. If they were subject to the 6% sales tax, would generate just over $17 billion a year. Now, we're recommending some exemptions. There is a lot of objections to taxing food. I personally don't have a problem with it, but a lot of people do. Some objections to taxing clothing. Definitely medical care should not be taxed. We're pretty strong on that. But even after you put those exemptions into the sales tax, you're still looking at generating about $14 billion a year, and the total property taxes to be eliminated are about $12 billion. So the sales tax will definitely generate more than enough to get the job done. No matter what happens, the swap for the elimination must be tax neutral. We don't want to see anybody having to pay more taxes overall than they're paying right now. The plan has been submitted to Americans for Tax Reform. That's the group where Governor Corbett signed the no tax pledge. We've submitted the plan to Americans for Tax Reform. They have certified it as being tax neutral, tax revenue neutral. So if the plan passes without too much meddling by the legislature, there's no reason why the governor won't sign it. I've spoken twice with Jen Branstetter, who is Governor Corbett's policy advisor, and she has said that if the bill reaches his desk and if it's tax neutral, he will sign it. Politicians promise, take it for what it is, but at least we've heard that much. I like that. The other thing about broadening the sales tax, I find this really kind of cute. There are some discrepancies in the sales tax code that need to be addressed. It should have been addressed a long time ago. Antiperspirants are not taxed. Deodorants are. There's lots of examples like that where we could be gaining more revenue and haven't done it. But we're talking about increasing the personal income tax, the state tax, by 0.5%, which is essentially an even swap for the elimination of the local EIT. So that's a one-for-one swap for the most part. Additional revenue from the portion of the property tax rent rebate fund is currently allocated to property tax rebates. We don't need property tax rebates anymore, so let's use the money. Act 1 gambling revenue currently allocated to property tax relief. It's going to go to a special fund. I'll explain that in a minute. The local school district real estate transfer tax would be collected at the state level rather than the local level. All property tax replacement revenue is replaced in a segregated lockbox account. Yes, over Social Security. I know, I've heard the argument. But you do what you can do. And maybe, just maybe, someone will honor the fact that it's in a segregated account. We hope so. And any fund balance that should accrue should not exceed 10% of disbursements. My understanding is 8 to 10% fund balance is reasonable in any business. We're saying here, if it gets to 10%, lower the rate of the sales tax. Take it from 6 to 5.5 if you have to stop getting so much revenue in here. School funding. Everybody's worried about school funding. We've heard this. It's for the children. We've got to be able to finance the schools. Okay. All school districts from the get-go will be held harmless, meaning whatever income they have from local sources right now, they will continue to get exactly that amount. They will take their average daily membership, divide that amount by the average daily membership. That is a per pupil cost in the first year. Second bullet, annually, you review each district's average daily membership and change the funding to the school based on changes in enrollment. Now, this is what's wrong with the current 1991 funding formula. This is why Berwick has all the money it does, and York Suburban doesn't, because the funding formula never took this into account. We're saying do this. If you have more than a certain population change in your school district, then we change the funding, either upward or downward, depending on the change. It's got to have a trigger level. 5 children moving out of the school district is not going to make a huge difference. Certainly, you're not going to change the funding based on that. But if you lose 30 or 40 students in the course of a year, change the funding. Reduce it. There's no reason that school district should be paid for those students if they're no longer in attendance. Annual funding increases based on the increase in the consumer price index and allocated to each district equally on a percentage basis. End of story. The 1991 funding formula uses all sorts of social engineering that takes into account poverty levels and the local ability to pay. Mathematicians couldn't figure out their funding formula. We're saying, given the amount of the increase in the consumer price index, do it by percentage to each district equally and get it over with. That way you don't have overfunded or underfunded districts. The Act 1 gambling revenue I mentioned to you as part of the mix, but not for general school district funding. Rather, for those 100 school districts that I talked about earlier that are currently in financial distress in Pennsylvania, use it to bring them to a minimum per pupil funding level, possibly based on a costing out study that was established a few years ago, but use that money exclusively to bring those school districts up to a level where they can afford to educate their students. There's really no reason to weight the distribution anymore as long as the second bullet is taken care of. Okay. Can't really leave the school districts to twist in the wind. We're recommending supplemental school funding through a local earned income tax or a personal income tax, but no exception referendum. None. Any local tax that they want to enact must be put to the taxpayers, period. If it's source of If it's for a specific project, like a new school, then the referendum must state the purpose of the project, the cost of the project, the tax rate to be applied, and a sunset date for the tax. It cannot go on forever. If it's for general school district funding, if you have a district that feels they're being inadequately funded and they need more money, great. Take it to the voters. But every 4 years, it can't go on forever, every 4 years, bring that referendum back and make sure the voters still want to keep paying that earned income tax. This gives the school districts some flexibility to fund as they wish, but the voters always have the last choice. The scope of the plan is replacement of school property taxes only, and this is where we differ greatly from Sam's plan. Sam's plan was originally all-encompassing. It was meant to completely revamp the education funding system in Pennsylvania. It was just too big of a bite. What we're saying is use this mechanism to get rid of the property taxes and replace them. And General Assembly, do what you want to do with basic education subsidy. They like to meddle with it. We know how much money has been dumped into the black hole in Philadelphia, and they continue to do it because the Philadelphia legislators arranged for the funding formula to work in their favor. Fine. You want to keep playing with the BES, let them do it, but get rid of the property taxes. That eliminates one of the major objections, too. We're also asking for introduction of concurrent legislation, constitutional amendment to forever abolish property taxes as a school funding source. Anything enacted by statute can be unenacted by statute. Once it's done with a constitutional amendment, it's finished, period, forever. So, I've had folks say to me, whoa, you're going to go to the sales tax. I'm going to pay much more in sales tax than I ever would have paid in property taxes. Here's a couple of quick formulas for you. If your school property tax is $1,500 a year, you would have to spend $25,000 annually on the newly taxed services to equal the amount of property tax eliminated. Second quick example, if your school property tax is $3,000 a year, you would have to spend $50,000 a year on newly taxed services to equal that $3,000. There's the math. School property tax divided by 0.06 tells you how much you'd have to spend to equal the amount of tax that's been eliminated. There's a more comprehensive calculator on the PTCC website. It takes into account your income, a number of other things, because there are income tax implications as well. If you want to go to the PTCC website, run the calculator, you can see almost exactly what a difference it would make in your taxes. But in general, that's the rule. The reason it works is because right now we're taxing 3.2 million homeowners. By using the sales tax, we're taxing 12.4 million residents of Pennsylvania, plus all the visitors who the state every year. You're just spreading the base much broader. 10 reasons to eliminate. The legislators seem to be very myopic about property taxes. This is why they always think about property tax relief. It's all about property taxes. They don't consider the implications of what can happen if they do it properly. First thing, you achieve true home ownership. You never really own your home as long as it can be taken from you. No matter what other tax you pay, if you don't pay it, you put a lien against your home. You don't pay your property tax, they'll take it out from under you. You'll be out in the street. The only tax that can do that. All you're doing is paying rent to the government under threat of eviction. Number two, stabilize school funding. Talked about that already, what has happened in Upper Marion and why I'm missing. Number three, help prevent foreclosures. We've seen what's happened during the housing crisis. How many people are paying $300, $400, $500 a month property tax escrows? They're struggling to pay their mortgage payment. Would they be able to stay in their home if they didn't have that property tax escrow tacked onto the mortgage payment every month? It would really slow down the foreclosure rate. Restore plummeting real estate values. We have a group in Monroe County. I talked to them earlier this week to get some updated figures. This is typical of what's in Monroe. This is not an extreme example. House on the market for $225,000. Now, this is not a $1 million mansion. $225,000 is not all that big a house. Total property tax load on it is $10,000 a year. If you figure the mortgage payment on a $225,000 house, property tax escrow would come out to 45% of the total mortgage payment. It'd be almost a 50-50 swap, 50% for the mortgage, 50% for the taxes. Who is going to buy a house under those circumstances? The housing market in Monroe County is in the toilet. They can't give a house away because nobody wants to take on that kind of a tax load, knowing it's going to go even higher. $1,000 a month property tax escrow? This is happening all over the state. Monroe County is just the tip of the iceberg. This would help restore real estate values. Who's the tiny housing market? Our son a few years ago wanted to buy, he and his wife wanted to buy a house. They could afford the mortgage payment, but they're having trouble coming up with enough to meet the property tax escrow. This is not unusual. In fact, I just got an email earlier this week from a man in Missouri County, same thing, wants to buy a house, can't afford the tax escrow. What would this do for the housing market in Pennsylvania? If you didn't have that property tax escrow to worry about anymore, how many more houses would be sold? How many more people would be getting into their own homes without having that added burden every month? It would do wonders for the housing market and the home builders as well.